Imagine a world where everything you believed about Christmas turned out to be a carefully constructed fairy tale. Hello, you are on the channel 33 Facts. Here we share amazing stories, scientific misconceptions, and unexplained facts. Get comfortable. Let's begin. First myth: Santa Claus wears red because of Coca-Cola. This is probably the most persistent Christmas legend circulating on the internet. People genuinely believe that before the 1930s, Santa wore green, blue, or brown clothes, and only after Coca-Cola's advertising campaign did he become the red-suited figure we know today. But this is absolutely false. Santa Claus in his modern red outfit appeared long before Coca-Cola ever used him in advertisements. The artist Thomas Nast drew Santa in red as early as 1863 for Harper's Weekly magazine. By the late 19th century, red had already become the standard color for Santa's costume in American and European illustrations. Coca-Cola merely popularized an image that already existed. Their 1931 campaign with artist Haddon Sundblom did make Santa more recognizable and gave him a warmer, more grandfatherly appearance, but they did not invent the red suit. But wait, the confusion likely arose because St. Nicholas, the historical figure who inspired Santa Claus, was often depicted in bishop's robes, which could be red, green, or gold depending on the artistic tradition and region. In different countries, gift-giving figures wore various colors. However, by the time the American Santa Claus character solidified in the mid to late 1800s, red had become dominant. Coca-Cola's advertising was so widespread and memorable that it created a false memory in popular culture, making people think the company had invented something that was already a century old. And it gets more interesting. Second myth: Jesus was born on December 25th. This date has no historical or biblical support whatsoever. The Bible never mentions the specific date of Jesus' birth. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke provide birth narratives, but neither gives a date. Early Christians did not celebrate Christmas at all for the first few centuries. The choice of December 25th was strategic, not historical. In the 4th century, the Roman Catholic Church selected this date to coincide with existing pagan festivals, particularly Saturnalia and the birthday of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. Now for the most curious part. Scholars who have attempted to calculate Jesus' birth date based on biblical clues suggest it was most likely in spring or early fall, possibly September or March. The Gospel of Luke mentions shepherds watching their flocks by night, which would not typically happen in December in Judea because winters there are cold and rainy. Shepherds would bring their flocks in from the fields during winter months. The December 25th date was a calculated decision by church leaders to overlay Christian meaning onto a time when people were already celebrating. And that's not all. Third myth: Christmas has always been a major Christian holiday. For many centuries, Christmas was actually a minor observance in the Christian calendar, far less important than Easter. The Puritans in England and colonial America actually banned Christmas celebrations, viewing them as pagan and sinful. In 1659, the Massachusetts Bay Colony made celebrating Christmas illegal, and anyone caught celebrating could be fined. This ban remained in effect for more than 20 years. Here is an important detail. Christmas only became a major holiday in America in the 19th century, influenced by immigration patterns and cultural changes. German and Dutch immigrants brought their Christmas traditions, including decorated trees and gift-giving customs. Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol in 1843 had an enormous impact on reviving and reshaping Christmas celebrations. The holiday was gradually transformed from a rowdy, carnival-like celebration into a domestic, family-centered occasion focused on children and gift-giving. Congress did not declare Christmas a federal holiday in the United States until 1870. And here's what's surprising. Fourth myth: there were 3 wise men and they were kings. The Bible never says how many wise men visited Jesus, nor does it say they were kings. The Gospel of Matthew mentions Magi from the east who brought 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. People assume there were 3 wise men because there were 3 gifts, but the text does not specify the number. There could have been 2, 4, 10 or even more. Let's dig deeper. The term Magi refers to Zoroastrian priests or learned men from Persia or Babylon who studied astronomy and interpreted dreams and signs. They were scholars, not monarchs. The tradition of calling them kings and giving them names developed centuries after the events. By the 6th century, Western tradition had named them Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar, and they were depicted as kings representing 3 different ages of man and sometimes 3 different continents. Additionally, the wise men did not visit Jesus in the stable on the night of his birth. According to Matthew's account, they arrived at a house, not a stable, and Jesus was a young child, not a newborn infant. Now pay attention. 5th myth. Christmas trees are an ancient Christian tradition. Christmas trees as we know them are actually a relatively modern custom, and they have pagan origins. The practice of bringing evergreen branches indoors during winter solstice celebrations predates Christianity by thousands of years. Ancient Romans decorated their homes with evergreen boughs during Saturnalia. Evergreens symbolized eternal life and the promise of spring's return during the darkest time of year. And then another detail emerges. The modern Christmas tree tradition began in Germany in the 16th century. Devout Christians brought decorated trees into their homes, and some built wooden pyramids decorated with evergreens and candles when wood was scarce. The tradition remained primarily German until the 19th century. Queen Victoria's German husband, Prince Albert, brought the custom to England in the 1840s. When images of the royal family around their Christmas tree were published, the practice became fashionable throughout Britain and spread to America and other countries. And here is where it gets really strange. 6th myth. Candy canes were created to symbolize Jesus. The popular story claims that a German choirmaster in 1670 invented candy canes shaped like shepherd's crooks to keep children quiet during long church services, and that the red stripes represent Jesus' blood and the white represents his purity. This charming tale is almost certainly false. There is no historical evidence for this story before the 1950s, when it began appearing in Christian publications. Candy sticks have existed for centuries, and white sugar sticks were common treats. The cane shape may have developed simply as a convenient way to hang candy on tree branches. But there is another version. Red stripes did not appear on candy canes until the early 20th century. Photographs and illustrations from the 19th century show plain white candy canes. The red coloring was likely added for aesthetic reasons, not religious symbolism. A candy maker in Albany, Georgia began mass-producing candy canes in the 1920s, and his brother-in-law invented a machine that automated their production in the 1950s. The religious symbolism story appears to have been retrofitted onto an existing candy tradition, creating a meaning that was never originally intended. The next point is no less amazing. 7th myth. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is a traditional Christmas character. Rudolph is actually a 20th century invention created for advertising purposes. Robert May, a copywriter for a department store, created Rudolph in 1939 as part of a promotional coloring book the store gave away to customers. The character had nothing to do with traditional Christmas folklore. May's story was inspired by his own feelings of being an outsider and his daughter's love of reindeer at the zoo. And here a new story appears. The story became enormously popular, and May's brother-in-law, songwriter Johnny Marks, adapted it into the famous song in 1949. Gene Autry recorded the song, and it became one of the best-selling Christmas songs of all time. The animated television special appeared in 1964 and has aired annually ever since, cementing Rudolph's place in Christmas culture. Despite feeling like an ancient tradition, Rudolph is younger than many people's grandparents. There were no reindeer at all associated with Santa Claus until a 19th century poem introduced 8 reindeer, and Rudolph would not join them for more than another century. If you enjoy our videos about amazing facts, myths, and bold debunking of lies, support us with a like and write the number 1 in the comments. If not, write 0. This way we'll understand what interests you and make our episodes even better. Let's move on. 8th myth. Christmas stockings come from a saint's generous gift of gold. The legend says Saint Nicholas threw bags of gold down a chimney, which landed in stockings hanging by the fireplace to dry. This story first appeared in the Middle Ages, centuries after Nicholas lived. Like many saint legends, it was created to demonstrate the saint's virtue and encourage charitable giving. There is no contemporary evidence that Nicholas of Myra ever performed such an act, but the story was so charming that it stuck and began to be retold in sermons, plays, and later children's books. And here's what's really interesting. The tradition of hanging stockings more likely comes from various folk customs involving leaving out shoes or boots for gift-giving figures. In many European countries, children left out their shoes for St. Nicholas or other gift-bringers to fill with treats. Dutch children put out their wooden shoes, German children left boots by the fireplace, and British children hung stockings. These were simply convenient containers that could hold small gifts. Over time, storytellers merged the humble practice of putting out footwear with the dramatic tale of falling bags of gold to produce the stocking myth families now repeat as if it were ancient history. The next detail may surprise you. Ninth myth. Mistletoe is a Christian symbol. Mistletoe has absolutely no Christian origin or symbolism. It is a purely pagan tradition that was absorbed into Christmas celebrations. The Druids considered mistletoe sacred, especially when it grew on oak trees. They believed it had magical healing properties and could protect against evil. The tradition of kissing under mistletoe comes from Norse mythology. The goddess Frigg's son Balder was killed by an arrow made of mistletoe. When he was restored to life, Frigg declared mistletoe a symbol of love and decreed that anyone passing under it should receive a kiss. The plant entered Christmas celebrations simply because winter greenery had already been used in solstice rituals, and people were reluctant to give up what felt beautiful and hopeful in the darkest part of the year. But there is a nuance. Early Christian leaders actually tried to ban mistletoe from Christmas celebrations because of its pagan associations. Holly and ivy were promoted as Christian alternatives with symbolic meanings. Holly's red berries represented Christ's blood, and its sharp leaves represented the crown of thorns. Mistletoe remained popular despite church disapproval, and the kissing tradition continued. In some versions of the custom, a berry had to be plucked for each kiss, and when all the berries were gone, the kissing privilege ended. The tradition softened over time from any kiss between unmarried people to a more innocent peck on the cheek, eventually becoming the mostly harmless holiday custom we know today, stripped of its older, darker magical associations. And here's another example. 10th myth. The Christmas wreath is a Christian symbol. Like mistletoe, wreaths have pagan origins. Ancient Greeks and Romans made wreaths from laurel, olive, and other plants to crown victorious athletes and honor gods. The circular shape represented eternity and the cycle of seasons. Romans exchanged evergreen wreaths during Saturnalia as symbols of good luck and prosperity, hanging them on doors as a sign that the household was taking part in the festival. Germanic tribes also used evergreen wreaths in winter solstice celebrations, tying them with ribbons and sometimes burning them or rolling them downhill as part of rituals welcoming the returning sun. It's time to move on. Christians adapted the wreath tradition, giving it new meaning. The circular shape was reinterpreted to represent eternal life through Christ, with no beginning or end. The evergreen symbolized everlasting life and God's unchanging nature. Candles were added during Advent, with each candle representing a week of preparation before Christmas. The Advent wreath tradition developed in Germany during the 16th century and spread throughout Christian Europe. However, the fundamental symbol itself predates Christianity by centuries. The Church's genius was not in inventing new symbols, but in repurposing existing ones with Christian meanings, allowing people to keep familiar forms while changing the stories they told about them. Here hides an important point. 11th myth. Silent Night was written in one night when a church organ broke. The popular story claims that on Christmas Eve in 1818, the organ at a small Austrian church broke down, so Father Joseph Moore quickly wrote Silent Night and asked Franz Gruber to compose music for guitar so they could still have music for Mass. This story is partially true but significantly embellished. Moore actually wrote the poem 2 years earlier in 1816, not on Christmas Eve 1818. He did bring the text to Gruber shortly before Christmas, and they did perform it with guitar accompaniment, but this was not a desperate act to save a ruined service. And here's what is usually not mentioned. The organ story was added later to make the carol's origin more dramatic and miraculous. The organ was indeed in need of repair during that period, but this did not cause the song's creation. The composition was deliberate, not an emergency improvisation. The song remained relatively unknown outside its region until traveling folk singers added it to their repertoires and carried it across Europe. Eventually, it reached America and was translated into many languages. The romantic image of a frozen village, a broken instrument, and a last-minute inspiration proved so irresistible that people repeated it until it became fact in the public mind, even though church documents show a slower, more mundane development. There is a continuation. 12th myth. Christmas caroling has always been a wholesome, family-friendly activity. The origins of caroling were far from the gentle, church-sponsored activity we picture today. Medieval and early modern caroling was rowdy and sometimes threatening. Groups of peasants would go to wealthy homes demanding food, drink, and money in exchange for songs and blessings. If homeowners refused, the carolers might damage property, block doorways, or sing insulting verses. This tradition, called wassailing, was more like organized begging with a soundtrack, a way for the poor to claim a small share of the wealth during the darkest part of the year. And now, a fact that is rarely discussed. Wassailing involved heavy drinking and could become quite raucous as bowls of spiced ale or cider were carried from house to house. The social tension was obvious. The rich feared the crowds but also knew that generosity brought protection and goodwill. The modern image of caroling as a sweet, candlelit family activity was largely created by the Victorians, who sanitized and sentimentalized many older customs. They removed the demanding, chaotic elements and turned caroling into a voluntary expression of holiday cheer, performed by church choirs and community groups, safely controlled and suitable for children and middle-class neighborhoods. From this moment, the most interesting part begins. 13th myth. Frosty the Snowman is based on traditional folklore. Frosty is another completely modern invention with no basis in ancient winter tales. The character was created by two songwriters in 1950, deliberately riding on the success of a previous hit about a red-nosed reindeer. They knew that if children could fall in love with one magical Christmas creature, they could fall in love with another. The lyrics sketched out a simple, catchy story about a snowman brought to life by a magic hat, nothing more than a clever commercial idea set to music. And then an unexpected twist. The animated television special that appeared at the end of the 1960s fixed Frosty's personality, voice, and look in the public imagination. After that, the character began to feel timeless, as if he had always been part of winter. Yet if you go back just a few generations, you will not find Frosty in any old carols, children's books, or folk stories. He is a reminder that tradition can be manufactured very quickly if a story is catchy enough, repeated often enough, and linked to powerful emotions like childhood wonder and holiday nostalgia. This moment changes everything. 14th myth. Christmas was always celebrated with elaborate gift-giving. The Victorian era transformed Christmas from a primarily religious and community celebration into a commercial, family-centered holiday focused on children and material gifts. Before the 1800s, Christmas gift-giving was modest, often limited to small tokens or food. The Industrial Revolution made consumer goods more widely available and affordable, and merchants quickly realized they could frame Christmas as the perfect time to buy those goods. Newspapers and shop windows began telling a new story. A good parent proved love through presents, and a proper Christmas centered around a decorated tree and parcels tied with ribbon. Let's look at the next point. The American department store culture of the late 19th and early 20th centuries actively shaped modern Christmas gift traditions. Stores created elaborate displays, hired actors to play Santa, and published gift catalogs that turned shopping into a seasonal ritual. By the early 20th century, Christmas had become heavily commercialized, and complaints about the commercialization of Christmas were already common. Ironically, blaming the present and idealizing the past became part of the new tradition. The same voices that promoted buying also reassured customers that they were preserving something pure and old, even as they were helping to invent something new and profitable. Let's move forward. 15th myth. Eggnog is a traditional medieval Christmas drink. While some forms of hot spiced milk and egg mixtures existed in medieval Europe, often called posset, the creamy eggnog we know today developed mainly in colonial America. Wealthy colonists mixed fresh farm eggs, milk, sugar, and imported spirits like rum or brandy into a thick, sweet drink served at winter gatherings. The name probably evolved from slang terms for strong grog and the small cups or noggins used to serve it. There was nothing uniquely Christmas about it at first. It was simply a rich, celebratory punch. Now what is often hidden. Eggnog was a status drink because its key ingredients were expensive. Spices, sugar, and liquor were taxed and imported, so only people with money could afford generous bowls of nog. Famous recipes from early presidents show shocking quantities of alcohol, more like a dessert you could set on fire than a gentle holiday sip. As dairy farming expanded and sugar and spirits grew cheaper, eggnog filtered down to the middle class. Companies began bottling ready-made versions, advertising them specifically for December. The drink slowly fused with Christmas in the public mind, until many people assumed it had always been part of the season rather than a once-elite party concoction. 16th myth. The Yule log is a Christian tradition. The Yule log practice comes directly from pagan winter solstice rites in Northern Europe. Communities would select an enormous log, sometimes dragged home in a small procession, decorate it with greenery or carvings, and burn it slowly through the longest nights of the year. The log symbolized strength, warmth, and protection, a physical pledge that light and life would return after the deep cold. Ashes from the log were treasured, scattered on fields for luck, or kept by the hearth to ward off lightning and misfortune. And then another detail emerges. When Christianity took root in those regions, the church did not simply ban the Yule log. Instead, it was gradually given new meaning, associated with the light of Christ coming into a dark world. The pagan name lingered, but the story wrapped around it changed. As homes shrank and chimneys narrowed in later centuries, there was no longer room for giant logs. The symbol shrank with the architecture, first to smaller decorative logs, then in France and elsewhere, to sponge cakes rolled and frosted to resemble wood. Today, many people know the Yule log mainly as a dessert, or even as a looping fireplace video on a television screen, unaware that they are looking at the latest miniature form of a ritual once central to surviving winter. 17th myth. Poinsettias are traditional Christmas flowers with ancient religious symbolism. Poinsettias are native to Mexico, where they grew wild on rocky hillsides and were used by the Aztecs as a source of red dye and medicinal preparations. The plant had no connection to European Christmas practices because Europeans did not even know it existed. That changed in the early 19th century when a diplomat, Joel Poinsett, sent cuttings home to America, where gardeners admired the plant's dramatic red bracts that flare in winter just as many other flowers fade. And here is where it gets really strange. The poinsettia's path to becoming a Christmas flower was driven less by folklore and more by savvy marketing. In the 20th century, a family of growers built a business around mass-producing poinsettias, carefully timing their blooming cycles to peak in December. They sent these plants to television studios and department stores, using live broadcasts and window displays as free advertising. Viewers came to associate the bright red star-shaped blooms with Christmas scenery. Only afterward did religious symbolism get layered on, the red as Christ's blood, the shape as the Star of Bethlehem. In other words, commerce came first, and the sacred explanations came later to justify what people already liked buying. 18th myth. Christmas cards have existed since ancient times. In reality, they are a very modern invention, barely older than a century and a half. Before the mid-19th century, people who wanted to send holiday greetings wrote letters by hand or shared wishes in person. When postal systems improved and printing became cheaper, an overworked civil servant in London decided there had to be a faster way. He hired an artist to design a single card with space for a short printed message that he could send to many people, solving his social obligations in one stroke. Now for the most curious part. That simple convenience collided with Victorian enthusiasm for collecting and display. People began pinning cards on walls, arranging them on mantels, and saving them in albums. Publishers rushed to fill the demand with increasingly elaborate designs, from snow scenes and cherubs to oddities like giant insects and clowns that would puzzle us today. The idea spread across the Atlantic, and soon Christmas cards became another seasonal obligation, complete with etiquette about who should receive one and which designs were tasteful. Today, even as paper cards give way to digital greetings, the same basic impulse survives: to prove connection and thoughtfulness through a small symbolic image and a line or two of text. 19th myth. Christmas pudding was always a festive treat. Its story is less about sweetness and more about survival, religion, and class. The earliest ancestor of Christmas pudding was a thick, savoury porridge made of grains, dried fruits, and bits of meat or fat cooked slowly to preserve ingredients in a time before refrigeration. It was eaten during winter fasts and feast days alike, a practical way to stretch food. Over centuries, the meat dropped out, sugar rose in, and the mixture became richer, spicier, and more explicitly tied to Christmas dinner. But wait, the dish also became a symbol in religious and political struggles. Puritan authorities in England saw it as decadent and linked to Catholic excess, so they tried to ban it along with other Christmas customs. When the monarchy returned, so did the pudding, this time wrapped in nationalist pride. By the Victorian era, households had developed intricate rituals around it. Every family member taking a turn stirring, wishes made in silence, silver charms hidden inside to foretell the finder's future. What began as a practical pot of boiled leftovers turned into a dense, symbol-laden centerpiece, heavy with brandy, flame, and meaning. 20th myth. Santa's workshop is at the North Pole. This very specific piece of geography is not ancient lore, but a cultural decision made in the 19th century and amplified in the 20th. Earlier European gift-bringers were vague about their home bases. They came from the woods, from the sky, from the north in a general sense. It was an American illustrator who began drawing Santa with maps and globes, hinting that he lived at the very top of the world, a place few people understood and none could visit. The choice was clever. The North Pole was remote, icy and mysterious, the perfect place for a magical toy factory. And it gets more interesting. Once the idea caught on, it created its own ecosystem of stories. Writers and advertisers filled in details about elves, reindeer stables, and enormous lists of children's names, all tucked away in a snow-covered compound that somehow runs on cocoa and cheer. Other countries responded with their own rival claims, placing Santa in deep forests or mountain villages within their borders, hoping to draw visitors and tourism. The true location of Santa became less important than the emotional truth people accepted. He lives somewhere far enough away to explain his invisibility, yet close enough in imagination to feel as if he might actually appear on a clear winter night. 21st myth. The Christmas pickle ornament is a German tradition. According to the popular story, German families hide a glass pickle in the branches of the tree, and the first child to find it on Christmas morning earns an extra present or good luck for the year. It sounds just exotic enough to spread quickly, especially in cultures that love adding authentic foreign customs. Yet when researchers asked actual German families about this, most had never heard of it. The supposed ancient tradition appears nowhere in old German folklore, songs, or household guides. Here is an important detail. The more historians have investigated, the more the evidence points to a marketing trick. In the late 19th century, American shops began importing glass ornaments from Germany, including ones shaped like fruits and vegetables. Pickles were among them, but they were not special. At some point, a clever salesperson or catalogue writer spun a story. This odd green ornament was not just a vegetable, it was a window into old-world European magic. Customers loved the narrative, repeated it to their children, and within a couple of generations, the invented tradition felt real. Today, many American families earnestly explain the German Christmas pickle to guests, unaware that the myth probably started in a shop window, not in a Black Forest village. 22nd myth. Jingle Bells is a Christmas song. It is almost impossible to walk through December without hearing it, yet the lyrics never mention Christmas at all. When the composer wrote it in the 19th century, he titled it One Horse Open Sleigh and intended it as a lively song for winter gatherings, possibly even for a Thanksgiving performance. The focus is not on gifts or holy nights, but on racing through snow, falling into drifts, and laughing about minor disasters on the ice. It is a song about speed, noise, and fun, not angels and mangers. And here's what's surprising. The transition from generic winter tune to Christmas anthem happened gradually as publishers began putting it into holiday songbooks, alongside explicitly Christmas-themed pieces. Because people most often sang it in December, the context slowly rewrote the meaning. Radio stations, advertisers, and films bundled it into their seasonal soundtracks, until for most listeners the jingle of sleigh bells became synonymous with the jingle of cash registers and the countdown to Christmas Day. The song did not change a word, but the culture around it shifted enough to drag it into the holiday canon permanently. 23rd myth. Boxing Day is about returning unwanted gifts. In modern shopping culture, the day after Christmas is associated with crowds, discounts, and long lines at customer service desks. It seems natural to assume that the name must come from boxes being hauled back to stores. Historically, though, the boxes in question were moving in the opposite direction. In Britain and some other countries, December 26th was the day when employers and the comfortable classes gave boxes of food, coins, and leftovers to their servants, and to the poor, a small acknowledgement of dependence on their labour throughout the year. Let's dig deeper. Churches also kept alms boxes where members dropped offerings for the needy, and these boxes were opened around this time and distributed. Servants who had worked long hours on Christmas Day to make their employers' celebrations smooth finally got a chance to visit their own families with these boxed gifts in hand. Over time, as domestic service declined and retail capitalism grew, the charitable meaning faded while the shopping meaning grew. The word boxing survived, but the direction of generosity reversed. Instead of the wealthy giving to those below, stores offered markdowns to middle-class customers, and the poor were mostly left out of the story. 24th myth. Christmas dinner has always featured turkey. The image of a huge roasted bird at the center of the table feels timeless, reinforced by stories and films. Yet for centuries, people simply ate whatever their region and income allowed. In parts of Europe, that meant goose, which was easier to keep and fatten. In others, it meant beef, pork, or even fish. When turkeys first arrived from the Americas, they were exotic creatures reserved for special occasions among the rich, not a standard part of any holiday. Now pay attention. Over the 19th century, improvements in farming and transportation made turkeys cheaper and more widely available. Writers like Charles Dickens mentioned them as luxurious gifts and feasts, helping to plant them in the popular imagination as the ultimate celebratory bird. Poultry producers then had a strong incentive to promote turkey as the proper Christmas choice, because it allowed them to sell large, predictable numbers during a short season. Gradually, habits hardened into tradition, and other options were treated as deviations, even though they had once been the norm. In truth, there is nothing sacred about turkey. It is simply the bird that won the marketing war. 25th myth. Christmas lights have always been electric. The soft glow of coloured bulbs wrapped around trees and houses seems safe and cosy enough, but its ancestor was far more dangerous. Before electricity, families who could afford candles would clip them directly onto tree branches with small metal holders. Trees were lit only for short periods, with someone watching closely and buckets of water nearby, because a dry branch could ignite in seconds. Stories of houses burning as a result of these displays were common. A grim price for a few minutes of glittering beauty. And then another detail emerges. When inventors began stringing small electric bulbs together, the first sets were handmade and extremely expensive, limited to the homes of the wealthy or used in store windows to attract crowds. It took decades of technical improvements and mass production before ordinary households could afford them and trust them not to spark fires. Outdoor displays did not truly explode in scale until the mid-20th century, when suburbs, cheap electricity, and car culture combined. Suddenly, decorating the outside of your house became a way to compete, to attract visitors, and to signal community spirit. The twinkling neighborhoods we drive through today are only a few generations old, proof of how quickly a new technology can reinvent what Christmas looks like. 26th myth. Christmas has the most suicides of any time of year. The idea is deeply rooted in public imagination and often repeated with a tone of tragic inevitability. People imagine lonely individuals driven over the edge by images of happy families and overflowing tables. Yet statistics from multiple countries consistently show that suicide rates dip during the holiday period and rise again later, particularly in spring and early summer. The myth persists not because of data, but because it feels emotionally plausible and makes for striking headlines. But there is another version. The focus on Christmas as a time of mental health crisis may actually help reduce harm. Public awareness campaigns, news segments, and community reminders to check on your loved ones intensify in December, encouraging conversations and outreach that might not happen in quieter months. At the same time, even strained families often make more effort to gather. Religious services are more frequent, and workplaces slow down, creating small pockets of support. The real danger comes when the lights and gatherings disappear, routines resume, and underlying problems that were briefly blurred by festive noise return in sharper relief. The numbers show that the crisis is not where we think it is. The next point is no less amazing. 27th myth. Christmas trees kill thousands of cats every year from poisoning. Concerned pet owners share alarming posts every season, warning that pine needles are deadly and that one sip of tree water can spell disaster. In reality, while some trees and additives can cause mild stomach upsets or skin irritation, the majority of cats who encounter Christmas trees suffer more from their own curiosity than from poison. The main risks are falls, broken ornaments, tangled cords, and swallowed tinsel, all mechanical rather than chemical dangers. And here a new story appears. The poisoning narrative likely arose from well-intentioned veterinary cautions about specific plants like lilies, holly, or mistletoe, which can indeed be harmful, combined with a general anxiety about artificial preservatives. As warnings were simplified and passed from person to person, nuance vanished and the tree itself was cast as a silent killer. Meanwhile, the actual lesson got lost. Monitor your animals around decorations, secure the tree so it cannot tip, avoid tinsel and fragile glass, and cover the water if you're using additives. The truth is less dramatic than the rumor, but far more useful for keeping both pets and ornaments in one piece. Let's move on. 28th myth. Christmas causes massive weight gain that lasts all year. Year after year, magazine covers and advertisements warn about an inevitable avalanche of pounds waiting between late November and early January. Numbers like 7 or 10 pounds are casually thrown around, reinforcing the sense that 1 month of parties can undo 11 months of effort. Careful studies, however, show a much smaller reality. Most people gain only a pound or two, and some gain nothing at all. The real issue is not what happens during the holidays, but what happens afterward. And here's what's really interesting. That small extra pound or two, if left unaddressed, tends to stay, and over many years it quietly accumulates. The myth of catastrophic holiday weight gain can actually backfire, making people feel hopeless and leading them to abandon moderate habits in favor of "I will fix everything in January" thinking. A more accurate view is gentler and more empowering. A few celebratory meals do not define your health. Enjoying special foods mindfully, staying somewhat active, and returning to your usual routines afterward matter more than any single dessert. The fear of Christmas eating is a bigger problem than the eating itself. The next detail may surprise you. 29th myth. Christmas in Australia is never celebrated in summer style. People in colder climates sometimes picture Australians sweating in heavy sweaters, stubbornly eating roasting turkey under blazing sun, surrounded by fake snow and pine trees, as if unable to escape European imagery. While some families do cling to imported traditions, reality across the country is far more flexible. Many Australians spend Christmas Day at the beach, grilling seafood, playing cricket in backyards, and wearing shorts and Santa hats together. Songs about sleighs and snow coexist with local tunes about surf, sun, and kangaroos. But there is a nuance. Australia is not a single culture, but a blend of many, and holiday customs vary by region, heritage, and personal taste. Immigrant families may maintain winter-style meals out of nostalgia, even as the temperature outside climbs. Supermarkets stock both hams and cold salads, both mince pies and mangoes. What outsiders often miss is that this mix is not a failure to adapt, but a sign that Christmas, like any tradition, can hold contradictions. It can be both European and Australian, both snowy in imagination and sandy underfoot, depending on who is telling the story. And here's another example. 30th myth. The war on Christmas is a recent phenomenon. It is easy to think that arguments about what to say in store greetings or whether public spaces should display nativity scenes belong solely to modern culture wars. Yet archived newspapers and pamphlets show that worries about Christmas being corrupted, attacked, or erased have surfaced repeatedly for over a century. In the early 20th century, critics railed against creeping secularism and the dominance of Santa over Jesus. In the mid-century, some groups claimed international organizations were plotting to replace Christmas entirely. It's time to move on. Every generation tends to imagine that their version of Christmas is under unique threat, forgetting that earlier generations felt the same. This anxiety is part of the festival itself, a way for societies to argue about deeper issues without naming them directly. When people fight over holiday displays, they are often really arguing about identity, power, and change. The war on Christmas is less a literal battle and more a recurring ritual. One more story layered on top of a holiday already made of stories. 31st myth. Christmas music is universally loved during the holiday season. Retail speakers, radio stations, and streaming playlists blast carols for weeks as if no one could possibly be tired of them. While many people do find comfort and nostalgia in familiar melodies, surveys of workers in shops and restaurants reveal a different side. Hearing the same limited set of songs on endless loop can increase stress and fatigue, especially when tied to pressure to be cheerful and sell more. Here hides an important point. The saturation of Christmas music in public spaces also assumes that everyone shares the same cultural and religious background. For those who do not celebrate Christmas or who have painful associations with it, the soundtrack can feel like a constant reminder that they are outside the imagined norm. Even for Christians, the heavy use of sacred hymns in advertising can blur the line between worship and marketing. A song once meant as prayer becomes a tool to get customers in the mood to spend, and that transformation rarely gets acknowledged openly. And here's what is usually not mentioned. 30-second myth. Christmas movies show realistic family dynamics. On screen, arguments are sharp but brief, misunderstandings are grand but fixable, and clumsy apologies under gently falling snow heal years of damage. Even when a plot dips into sadness, you can be almost certain it will rebound to laughter and hugs before the credits roll. Real families are messier. Old grievances do not vanish because someone plugs in lights. And some relatives are absent not because of silly mix-ups, but because of serious harm or distance that cannot be bridged in a 2-hour script. There is a continuation. These glossy narratives are not evil, but they do create expectations that weigh heavily on viewers. People absorb the idea that a proper Christmas must end in reconciliation, and that if their own holiday does not, they have failed. Instead of seeing films as fantasies, they measure their own lives against them. Understanding that the genre is built around wish fulfillment, not documentary truth, can relieve some of that pressure. You are not required to manufacture magic on schedule to have a meaningful holiday. And now, a fact that is rarely discussed. 33rd myth. Christmas traditions are stable and unchanging. Every ritual that feels immovable today was once an experiment. Someone was the first to bring a tree indoors, the first to put a stocking on a mantle, the first to sing a carol in a new language. Many ideas did not catch on and vanished without a trace. What survived and became tradition did so because enough people found it useful, beautiful, or profitable to repeat. From this moment, the most interesting part begins. If you look closely, you can see Christmas still evolving in real time. New foods appear on tables as immigration reshapes neighborhoods. Digital rituals form as families scattered across continents open gifts together on video calls. Online marketplaces and global shipping introduce decorations borrowed from cultures halfway around the world. In a few decades, some of these new habits will be described as if they had always been there, while today's innovations will be cloaked in nostalgia and declared untouchable. So what remains certain about Christmas? Very little, actually. The date itself is arbitrary. The customs are borrowed from multiple sources and constantly changing. The commercial aspects are modern inventions. The religious elements have been negotiated and renegotiated throughout history. What we have is not ancient truth, but recent construction. Christmas means whatever each generation decides it means. The myths we have explored tonight are not problems to solve, but windows into how culture works. Stories spread, meanings shift, marketing shapes tradition, and people believe what feels true rather than what actually happened. Thank you for watching 33 Facts. If this episode changed how you see Christmas, share it with friends who still believe these myths. Subscribe to our channel for more fascinating investigations into what everyone thinks is true, but is not. Until next time, question everything, even the most beloved traditions. Happy holidays, take care of yourself and your loved ones, and see you in our next episode.